Hello, everyone, and welcome to Divide and Conquer. We're named as such because of our intent. What is our intent? Well, we are a group of sport and performance psychology consultants and contractors here at Fort Polk, Louisiana. We also fall under the Army Resilience Directorate, and you can find them on Facebook and Twitter at Army Resilience. Each episode, we pose a question or issue related to resilience and or performance enhancement that we as a group will conquer through our individual answers, and you'll find out pretty quickly our perspectives and stances are pretty much the same. Today might be different again. We hope you enjoy our takes on today's question, which is mastery an end state or a constant journey? Before we dive into them, I'm going to introduce everyone here. So here I have Coach Jess, the return of Coach Jess, Coach Marius, and John Pine. And my name still is and probably will be for the remainder of my life, Diego. I'll keep that going as long as I can. To me, it seems that depending on a whole lot of factors, which I'm not going to get into, but I think for the majority of people, in a practical sense, there is an end state that is hard to define, but like if someone as a hobbyist, like amateur hobbyist or whatever, just for example, let's say they're like a woodworker, and at some point they get to the ability that they can start selling like pieces that they make. For them, that might be an end state. Or for someone who regularly plays like a dueling piano type of thing. I don't know why that popped into my head. Or like just plays guitar at like a local spot regularly. Or plays in a band, whatever. That might be an end state to them. That might be all they want. So, not saying that they're stopping their practice altogether. To me, it seems in a very pragmatic way, for a lot of people, there is an end state where maybe they're not putting as much effort into whatever it is that they previously were putting a whole lot of effort into, because they're starting to see like the fruits of their labor in a way that is, I guess, fulfilling enough. However, on the flip side, depending on the person, I think if they're extremely competitive and are in the, let's say, like elite of the elite. So like the clearest example I can think of is Cristiano Ronaldo. He's currently 35 years old and like scoring, I don't know, like at least once a game. And he's been doing that for the past, 15 years or something like that. And his interviews, people always ask him like, how are you staying like so prolific and how are you such a great competitor still? And he's like, because I'm always learning. I always want to be the best. I never want to stop. That mentality. And by all accounts, anecdotally, his teammates are like, yeah, he's always the first one to come in, last one to leave. Even after games, he's doing sprints. He's doing like 1,000 sit-ups or something like that. Some like seemingly insane amount of whatever. And to me, but when you get to that level, it seems like to me, the way he talks about it seems like a necessity to continually work on his craft. And regardless of the age thing, because he's still performing at a much, much higher level than most people ever will in their lifetime. I guess if you're in that top 0.01% of the 1%, there's a reason why you got there. And it's because you want to be the best either version of you or the best version of anybody in that field. And then you can be like Michael Jordan or Cristiano Ronaldo, Kobe, what have you. Yes and no. Caveat, depending on who you are and what level you are in with respect to other people in your field.
I'd be curious to know for both Cristiano and our hypothetical woodworker that if you ask them if they feel like they are masters of their craft, what their responses would be. And I would venture to probably say both would say no. Now, both might be, I'll take that back. For Ronaldo, if you asked him if he's satisfied, I could see him saying no. He still wants to get better. He still wants to learn, improve all these things. Now, the woodworker, they might be satisfied with where they are. But they might recognize that, hey, in this journey, when you initially asked me what would it require for me to be a master, it would be for me to sell these cute little birdhouses that I make and make money for it, then that would be me mastering my craft. And then when they get to that point, it makes me think of the fact that we don't know what we don't know, right? And so all of a sudden it opens up all these doors where they're like, oh, there's a cooler way to do this, or there's a different way to do this. And they get to that point and they're selling these birdhouses, and maybe they truly don't want to do anything after that, but at least their mind has been opened up to, whoa, there's this whole other world of woodworking that I didn't even know. And so maybe then when you ask them, okay, what does mastery look like? It's like, oh, someone that could do these houses in 2 minutes, or that could do all these crazy designs on it, or whatever it is. And so it makes me think if it's more of a question of, maybe mastery is a continuous process, but maybe there's a level of satisfactory that we could reach where we're like, we're good. We recognize that if I wanted to get even better, I could, and there's ways to do that, and I would have to keep working. Maybe for the casual person, they can clearly and intentionally establish places where this is the level that I want to get to, and that's where I'm going to end, but recognizing that mastery would entail more work, more effort, and a continuous process.
I think maybe I was answering a different question then. Like what the definition of mastery is, right? Because I would imagine whoever you ask, there would be some discrepancies in their answers. And maybe that's where the satisfaction piece comes in.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, though, which is why I brought up that quote of, we don't know what we don't know, where if you initially ask that person who's going into woodworking, maybe they truly thought at that point that mastery would be, oh, I can sell these birdhouses to this crazy birdhouse buying population, which I didn't know existed. But maybe that's the mastery that they first imagined. But I would say my argument is that as they went along that process and maybe got to that point where they're making great money selling birdhouses, they all of a sudden realize, oh, there's different levels, right? I could go even beyond this. There's more that I could do. There's more that I could learn. And I'm not saying that they need to get to a point where they want to or they need to, but if we ask that person initially before they started that journey, and then we ask them after they got to that point, I think their answers to what is mastery would have changed.
So I like this idea of a subjective term of mastery, and I think for either both the soccer player or the woodworker, again, I agree with you at the beginning when they both started their craft, whether it's soccer or woodworking, they make giant leaps early on, and they continue to get better and better. And at a certain point, there's this point of diminishing returns. And I think for either performer, once that point of diminishing returns outweighs the effort involved, is where they might just be content with where they're at. And so typically we see hyper-competitive athletes like Cristiano Ronaldo. They want those smaller points of diminishing returns because that is what separates them from the group of professional athletes to the top 1% of professional athletes. Whereas the woodworker, they don't, being the top 1% of woodworkers in the world, maybe that's not, they're content with just being able to sell their birdhouses to their neighbors or friends or whatever it is, the population.
Yeah, and I think, John, that's where I originally wanted to go. I was approaching this from a pragmatic approach because it seems like yes, even being a pragmatist and the whole mastery question, I think there's room there for people to realize, there are these diminishing returns where I can get this marginally better if I keep working at it, but at some point, I would imagine those also from a pragmatic point of view would, I don't know how they would define it, but they would probably say this is what I would consider to be, I guess, enough or satisfactory, like we talked about earlier.
And I think it differs on the individual as well, because when your career is, again, with Cristiano Ronaldo, when your livelihood is wrapped around this performance that you do, you're going to want those. But if it's just a hobby, some side hobby you're doing, you're probably more content with a higher or a lower level of perfectionism, mastery.
My other thought, you mentioned the word subjective, is I feel like it's a good interplay between subjective and objective of what is a master and what is mastery, because when you mention Ronaldo, I instantly thought of top level performers. So if you ask Ronaldo, if you ask Michael Jordan, if you ask Kobe Bryant, if you ask them if there's still more for them to learn and more areas to get better, I feel like it would be a resounding yes, right? And so and then I had this thought of like, if you ask Michael Jordan if he's the best, if he's the best player, would he say yes? He said 100% he would say yes. And then if you ask him if he could get better, he would also say 100% yes. And so that, to me, makes me think of more of this mastery is this constant journey that is never ending, and it can get you to incredible levels of success. But to me, it remains doubtful that you could ever get to a point where you say, I have truly mastered absolutely everything that there needs to be mastered, and I'm done.
I know that there is some objective, I don't even know if it's necessarily research or not, but that's been thrown out. So the 10,000 hours leads to quote unquote mastery. We've heard this. Again, I'm not sure how empirical that is, because I'm sure we could all come up with people that we know or stories that we've heard where people in fact mastered something prior to hitting 10,000 hours. And then you also have people that are well beyond 10,000 hours that still haven't mastered their craft. But regardless, there's this like number out there. Okay, 10,000 hours, I should be a master. I think something that also would be really interesting to think about is if today or in today's age, are people more interested in specificity? So I need to be able to put in so much time into this one thing to master it. Or if we are more interested in being well-rounded. So this idea of like range, which there's a book called Range by David Epstein, and he looks at this idea of people being more well-rounded, and that doesn't really allow for you to master any one thing. So I don't know if y'all have an opinion about that, but because to your point, John, of diminishing returns, so say I'm maybe getting closer to mastery, but I've lost interest or I've lost the ability to see that I'm making progress. And so I decide, I'm just going to drop this and I'm going to pick something else up. And, you know, as kids are put into so many different organizations, like find your niche kind of thing. And then once you do, let's just put you in that one thing. But then there is this idea where you have so many more opportunities nowadays to get involved into different things. So I'm not really sure the answer to that, or if we can even really hit mastery anymore.
I think it's a good point to bring up, because like now more than ever we have the opportunity to explore a whole range of crafts or whatever you want to call them, whereas I think in the past it's much more difficult to gain as much information about a whole host of things. And then if you really wanted something, you had to like be an apprentice or go to a very specialized type of either formal or informal education. Whereas now, you know, even in college, there's liberal arts curriculum. So it's like there's the whole reason, well, I'm not going to get into one of the reasons, but one of the reasons behind it is to have the individual going through that university to come out a bit more well-rounded in terms of their, not necessarily level of expertise, but I guess their background, to kind of build a foundation for their specialized degree. At least that's how I've been sold on it. But versus like a trade school, like the trade school is like half of the amount of time. Well, depending on the specific trade, can be half the amount of time of a traditional bachelor's degree. But one of the reasons is because you're being hyper focused on one specific trade. So the whole range versus being specialized, to me, I feel like I think the attractiveness of being good at various amounts of things versus being like the top, I think that can be very attractive for a lot of people.
I think that to be a deep generalist, if you can put it at that, you still have to become a master at something. So it could be you sifting through information. It could be your learning process. It could be how you keep an open mind, or whatever it may be. And so I think there's still a mastery process there where maybe it's not being hyper specific in terms of a category, but it could be a skill set. And maybe to my original point about subjectivity, the interplay between subjectivity and objectivity, I think about how you mentioned just a violinist who's put in 10,000 hours or 10,000 iterations to become a master. It kind of makes me think about, is that us putting the label that she's a master? And I keep coming back to that question of, if you asked her, have you achieved mastery? I'm curious what that question would be, because I keep coming back to that point where if you ask these people that have put in that work and put in that effort to get to that point, at least I would like to believe that they have this humility to say no. Or not even to say no, but have this humility and respect for the craft or whatever they're working on to say, no, there's more stuff to learn. There's other things to get better at. Keep working on.
Do you then think that there would be a difference between calling yourself a master and mastery? So for example, if you moved up in a company or if the army, let's say, and you become a general, you would by default be a master of your craft in the sense of you're at the highest level. You have nowhere up to go. So by default, I am in fact a master, whether I agree with it or not. Now, would I, though, feel as if I have conquered or have mastery over something, maybe a different story, because to your point, Marius, of like, I don't know what I don't know. And once I hit, say I'm a master in the sense of I'm now an army general, but I don't feel like I have mastery over X, Y, and Z within my position. Or I've hit this height, or I've hit these different ability levels, and then I recognize there's still more to go. And so I think that there may be a difference between the level of a master and then actual mastery, if that makes sense. Did I just confuse everybody some more? Okay.
No, I would say that's a fair distinction, because I feel like as soon as that person says not just that I'm a master, but I've also achieved mastery, they stop learning and they stop growing and they stop progressing. And then someone will pass them by. And then how can you say that, oh, that person's achieved mastery if there's someone else passing, like zooming by them because they said, nope, I've learned and done everything that I need to do. So yes, I would say that there is that distinction between being able to call someone a master, because from a pragmatic standpoint, like we kind of have to at certain points, like you mentioned in the army example. But that process of mastery maybe speaks more to the mindset that master has. Maybe that's what I'm getting at, is more of the mindset behind this process, where I believe that as long as that individual keeps the mindset of, a growth mindset of there's always more to learn, or there's always more perspectives that I can take or see, and keep tweaking with things and seeing if I can get even better, they're going to stay on that path of mastery. But if they declare, I'm a master, this path is done, I almost feel like that path just kind of dies.
I think even within someone recognizing that regardless of whether they are a master, but if they feel that there is still room, I think there's an intensity that needs to be considered, because I think for any level really, but I think particularly when you get people who start out into a new craft, there is like a pretty high intensity behind the learning aspect of it that may or may not taper. But I think depending on the person, if you're already at that, if you're at a very, very high level, but you still realize there's stuff to learn, there's stuff that can be tweaked in some way, I think that intensity level also can guide the rest of that trajectory. And I'm not saying one has to have a high intensity level behind that type of mindset, but I think it's something to consider too, because I feel like some people may or may not get more casual about it as time moves along. Like I think of myself starting off playing guitar, I was like super all about it, hours on end, every day. And eventually I'm not saying other parts of my life got in the way. I let those parts of my life get in the way of continuing to learn more. So now it's not hours and hours every day. It's still, I'm okay with how many hours I put behind it. But I'm not saying I'm nowhere near like any type of professional guitarist, but that intensity I've noticed has diminished. And I feel like that's something that is to be considered, because whenever we talk about growth mindset with soldiers, this is just me, there is an implied like high intensity behind it. Like if you have a growth mindset, you're constantly always yearning for that feedback so that you can apply whatever it is for the next time and be as effortful as possible behind it, so that way you're only setting yourself up for more success. Whereas I feel some people are a bit more casual about it. Like, yeah, they must have a growth mindset, but it's not the end all be all in terms of how they govern their lives. And also we teach that you're not always going to have a growth mindset about everything that you do, which I think can also impact the intensity level of how actively and intense are you pursuing that particular skill or craft, what have you.
It makes me think about the role of healthy competition in the process of mastery, because if we think of the Army example just that you gave, or if we think about athletics, even in the business world, to reach certain levels, you're competing against other individuals, right? And you mentioned, John, the diminishing returns that we get, right? Cristiano Ronaldo knows that as soon as he slows down, someone is going to pass him up. Someone is going to pass him up in the next 20, 30 years, most likely, regardless.
I hope so.
But he even knows now, with age, that as soon as he stops putting in that same amount of work and effort, someone is going to zoom past him, right? And so it makes me think about having that healthy level of competition can help turn up that intensity, right? So if you were trying to audition for something, for a band, right, maybe that would help inject some of that intensity to keep those hours up. So for the casual person, it's curious, like, can we really achieve those higher levels of mastery if we don't have that level, some sort of level of competition to bring us to new heights?
And I think it might not even need to be competition, but maybe some degree of loss, like having some sort of, what am I trying to say here?
Like an outcome?
Yeah, or like to have stakes in general. Like, it doesn't have to be competition, just some degree of a higher stake is on the line can motivate us as well.
But at the same time, though, like what you're talking about, Marius, I feel like what you're talking about, regardless of the competition aspect or if there's stakes, that intensity, now that I'm thinking about it, that's probably what defines the category of being a novice or amateur hobbyist, amateur whatever, versus someone who's a professional, because that intensity probably doesn't waver that much for the professional. At least until they stop getting, maybe they stop getting paid for it or whatever.
Actually, as y'all were just discussing, what popped into my head was the difference between, am I mastering something because yes, it is in fact my job to master something, or for mastery's sake to be able, competition, I'm just the best. So whether it's ego or whatever's driving you, or is it mastery in the sense of I just enjoy what I'm doing? So Diego, if you just enjoy playing the guitar and some weeks go by and you don't put in as much time as you normally would, but you're still it doesn't matter. Like, you're still going to be progressing towards that ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. And so it's less about the mastery and more about just the enjoyment of the task itself. So intrinsic motivation, but I think that could change as well. The intensity level of, do I feel like this is necessary to my well-being, or do I just enjoy it and it isn't necessary to like keep a roof over my head? That went intense right there.
If my apartment was contingent upon me being the best guitar player I can be, I'm not sure I'd have an apartment. we'll probably chew on this some more and maybe come back to it, visit, because I think this is fascinating to talk about just because of how abstract it is. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Divide and Conquer, and I think this one's gonna close out the season. Yeah, because we got Coach Jess back, so we'll take a hiatus, and I don't know when we'll be back. But stay tuned, I guess.
Absolutely stay tuned.
Do what you want. I'm not in charge of your life. See you next time.